Genesis chapter 32 today, in Genesis chapter 32. Like yesterday, we looked at the fact that Jacob left his father-in-law Laban's household to return to his own country. Chapter 32 really tells the beginning of that journey. As he begins going back to his own country, he still is facing the situation with his brother Esau, the reason that he fled his country in the beginning. So as he kind of drew near to the place that he called God's camp, he sent a messenger out to his brother Esau. The messenger returned with this news, that Esau was coming to greet him along with 400 men. Jacob grew afraid and was afraid what Esau might do to him if he still harbored anger in his heart. He sent out another messenger with gifts to him. And as the chapter draws to a close, we see Jacob wrestling with this individual that he comes to know as God. And I'd like, if you would, just to read that section together. It says in verse 24, "Then Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him into daybreak. When he saw that he had not prevailed against him, he touched the socket of his thigh, so the socket of Jacob's thigh was dislocated while he wrestled with him. Then he said, 'Let me go, for the dawn is breaking.' But he said, 'I will not let you go unless you bless me.' So he said to him, 'What is your name?' And he said, 'Jacob.' He said, 'Your name shall no longer be Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with men and have prevailed.' Then Jacob asked him and said, 'Please tell me your name.' But he said, 'Why is it that you ask me my name?' And he blessed them there. So Jacob named the place Peniel, for he said, 'I have seen God face to face, yet my life has been preserved.'" Austin?
I wanted to think about the idea of winning and losing from that text that that David just read for us. This is a really pivotal moment in the story of Jacob, and up until this point, Jacob has been characterized as a man who schemes, who lies, who bargains with God. Even in this very own chapter, we see him coming up with this elaborate scheme to save his family from the wrath of Esau. But there's two phrases that are said here in this story that are really interesting. First of all, in verse 25, this man who we find out is God says that when the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob, he touched his hip socket, and Jacob's hip was put out of joint as he wrestled with him. And so, with one movement, this man basically incapacitates Jacob. Now all Jacob can do is hang on. But then something else interesting is said in verse 28, where he blesses Jacob and says, "Your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with men and have prevailed." So it seems like Jacob loses, and then it's said that he wins. And what's the deal there? Well, it seems like, obviously, God cannot be beaten by a man, by Jacob. But it seems like Jacob wins and prevails because he loses. And the idea there is that Jacob finally understands that his real enemy isn't outside of him. It's not Esau, it's him. It's himself. It's his character and the way that he's been up to this point. And so I think the lesson for us is we only win when we finally lose ourselves and we turn ourselves over to God.
Great point. I want us to turn back in the chapter to really in verse 7. When Jacob heard the news that Esau was coming along with 400 men, it said he was greatly afraid and distressed. Now, up until this point in Jacob's life, he had tried to do everything to prevail, to scheme, to get ahead by his own devices. But what we see him do in this very text is he turns to God. He turns to God with prayer. And I think it is noteworthy what he prayed to God. First of all, he prayed to God about his promise that God had spoken to him. And then secondly, he recognized his own unworthiness, or the fact that God had given him a blessing he did not deserve. And I think it's just a lesson for us in this. When we grow afraid or disturbed by things around us, remember to turn to God and remember the things that he's spoken and remember the great blessings that he's promised us despite our own inadequacies and sinfulness. I think that's a great lesson that Jacob teaches us. Well, thank you for joining us today. If you have any thoughts on this chapter, please put them in the comments below. We'd love to see and hear what you think about this great text of Scripture. Join us tomorrow as we look into Genesis chapter 33, and have a great day.